I think innovation happens in that sort of grey area of the Venn diagram where science is on one side and art is on the other. That's where innovation is sparked.
You're listening to the Futures Podcast live from Engage Works' Flux Innovation Lounge, a futuristic spaceship that has landed in the heart of London's design district. On this show, we meet the scientists, technologists, artists, and philosophers working to imagine the sorts of developments that might dramatically alter what it means to be human. Some of their predictions will be preferable, the others might seem impossible, but none of them are inevitable. My name is Luke Robert Mason, and I'm your host for this evening. As artificial intelligence becomes increasingly pervasive in everyday life, it's time to take a step back and question many of the fundamental assumptions that are baked into its design. We're being told how this revolutionary technology will have a profound impact on humanity. Now, whether that takes the form of a yet-to-be-realized benefit or a massive existential risk is still up for debate, but nobody knows the importance of responsibly communicating the complexities of new technology better than our first guest this evening. Dr. Shini Somara's work bridges the gap between academia and media, research and education to empower the next generation of innovators and thinkers. We may find at our own peril that in a rush to develop these new thinking machines, that there may be a lack of much needed diversity of thinking. So, to show us how we might create effective, ethical and equitable innovations, please put your hands together and join me in welcoming Dr. Shini Somara to the Futures Podcast stage. And your background is wildly fascinating. Part of the reason I wanted you on the show is because you were doing something I wish I could be doing, which is wandering around the world looking at wonderful scientific and mechanical innovations. But how do you think your background in mechanical engineering and science communication has informed the way in which you specifically understand new technologies?
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. It's great to be here. And when you have a curiosity and you have wonder for the world around you, science and STEM, science, technology, engineering and maths, can be a great way to find out more. I've always been someone that wants to understand how things work. And I was that classic engineering kid that would take things apart and try and put them back together. Never managed to succeed, but I always just wanted to understand the inner workings of things. Mm-hmm. And that curiosity hasn't left me. Technology has obviously advanced a lot, and I still want to understand how they work and why we need them and how we can solve problems using innovations. So it's an approach. My background gives me an approach to technology and innovation.
And how do you think you've seen your field of mechanical engineering change? I mean, it's changed quite rapidly in the last couple of years, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think as with all industries, it's become more digital. So mechanical engineering is typically gears and cogs and construction and building things and making things and prototyping. But so much of that has become digital. And I think that's a really good thing because it's increased the pace of invention. And, you know, if you're considering a sort of manufacturing technique and big, heavy tools, and that has gone digital, it just means there's more flexibility in the way we do things. We can get creative with the way we engineer things. So it's been mostly positive. But I think in the media, we tend to hear about all the negative. And certainly in my work, I'm always wanting to bring out the good of engineering because essentially engineers are problem solvers. And So I hope that I can convey the good through my work.
What do you think currently are some of the most pressing concerns when it comes to new and innovative technology?
I'll tell you what my pressing concern is. When I talk about engineering and I invite Q&A from an audience, I don't know what they're going to ask me. And typically, one of the key questions is, why do you promote engineering when engineering can feel like it's fundamentally bad? A lot of people think that engineering is nuclear power or defense or, those kinds of technologies. And I'm not saying that engineering is not those things, but there is so much engineering that is engineered for good, trying to find genuinely good solutions to global challenges. And so I think my biggest bugbear at the moment is trying to update the public perception of engineering so that future engineers and potential people who want to consider STEM as a career know that they can have a positive impact on our future, because we are fed so much negativity about innovation and technology, and it really bugs me. So I'd like to add some hope, be positive about STEM.
Well, let's talk about adding some of that hope, because it does feel like, with what we're being told about new and emerging technologies, it's either one side or the other. Either it's going to lead to imminent doom, or it's the next innovation that you need to be part of. So when you're speaking to young individuals about how to get involved in STEM and how to be educated to prepare for this unknown future, where do we start?
I think we start young, is the short answer. And that comes after sort of doing many talks and visits to schools and talking to college students and about STEM, and not really seeing the needle moving, particularly in engineering. We have such a low percentage of girls going into engineering. And I really tried my best to fly the flag and say, I did engineering, you can too. But I felt that I was speaking to an audience who had already made up their minds.
Yeah.
And one day I actually stopped and asked myself, why was it that I went into engineering? And quite simply, it's because my dad's an engineer. So it meant that from a very early age, it was normal to kind of help out with DIY. It was normal to kind of ask a million questions. It was just, it didn't feel strange that I had that curiosity. And so I think it's important to break stereotypes early, forget all this, girls can't have construction sets and can't sort of play with Lego and that kind of thing. And just normalize industries to welcome in not just different genders, but, I've got a real passion for encouraging widening participation, because I think that STEM and engineering and innovation really lacks diversity and really lacks inclusion. And the reason why it's so crucial for innovation to have diversity and inclusion is because with a wide array of perspectives, we can just innovate better. And, widening participation, in other words, people who would never consider going into university or would never consider STEM careers might just consider it, might just, find a route into technological careers and could be, I always think of maybe a little girl might have the solution to something like cancer in her head. But if she's not given the opportunities to get an education, it's wasted on all of us. So.
But when it comes to this term, widening participation, it's not always just about the youth, but it's also about STEM returners. There's a returning workforce that we also need to consider in how we engineer the future, I guess.
I'd love to know from the audience, how many people think that technology and STEM subjects are for people who are particularly good at science, or, show of hands, do people think that technology and innovation is just for physicists or just for mathematicians? Or because I think there is this kind of assumption that you've got to be brilliant at these subjects, and actually we really need all kinds of skills, particularly creative. Engineering is such a visionary, imaginative kind of career. You've got to have these crazy ideas to kind of build them and design them and prototype them. And STEM returners is another area, another sort of cohort that maybe went through an educational or training process, and then particularly for women, maybe moved away to have children, raise families, and then lack the confidence to go back in. And again, we're losing talent that way.
Yeah, well, it feels like a lot of these innovations, they are reliant on the talent pool and a diversity of thinking, as you said there. But how do you think diversity of thinking, how can it help innovation? In what ways on the ground are you seeing these sorts of collaborations occur where suddenly we're thinking differently about the future?
I ran a podcast for Women in STEM, and I invited all kinds of women onto that podcast. Esteemed women had younger to older mothers, people from all ethnicities. And what was really interesting was just their motivation for wanting to go into STEM subjects. If they came from developing countries, wanting to get trained up so that they could return back to their countries and build infrastructure, or, and just having those perspectives just widens our perspective. We're really fortunate in the UK, but having, I don't want to single out any kind of groups of people, but for example, if you were building a solution for older communities in the home, for example, you were trying to make homes more safe for older individuals, you wouldn't want young graduate engineers as a team. I mean, you wouldn't just want young graduate engineers, you'd want a whole mixture. I certainly, as my parents' age, it's opened my eyes to a lot of things which I never would have appreciated in my youth. So those perspectives are crucial.
How have you seen your industry change? Now, your expertise is, and let me get this right, computational fluid dynamics, and that got a resurgence over COVID. I didn't realize that, in actual fact, that was quite key to a lot of the way we were thinking about the COVID issue.
So Computational Fluid Dynamics, or CFD for short, is the software that engineers use to visualize how gases and liquids, which are fluids, flow and how they behave. And when I was researching it for my doctorate, we're going back 20 years here, I was looking at airflow within buildings, and how that is relevant to engineers is that in the UK, in London, for example, we have many high-rise buildings, and if the air conditioning systems are not functioning effectively, you can get something called sick building syndrome, where there are pockets of air that just remain stagnant and don't move. And it's a perfect breeding ground for bacteria, because bacteria love warm, moist spaces. And so people would get sick breathing in this stagnant, toxic air. It's the same effect as what happened in the pyramids. The doors were shut, the air was kept in there for countless numbers of years, and then when the archaeologists opened the door, they breathed in all this toxic gas and it killed them. It wasn't a curse from the gods.
It was computational fluid dynamics.
Yeah. Had we had that software, we would have been able to see where pockets of air were stagnant. But CFD is also used to model aircraft wings and Formula One cars, much more sexy part of CFD. But how it applies to COVID is that by looking at how air behaves in spaces, we can see COVID particles being transported. And so CFD was really useful for looking at social distancing, a cough, like how far would it travel before it fell to the floor? And that's how we got all our measurements of, maintain a 1.5 meter distance. And if you're jogging, it has to be smaller distance because air travels with speed, and there's a lot of science behind it.
Well, the assumption is usually that's health science, but we don't realize there's a lot of engineering behind these sorts of things. There's so much in the world that requires hidden engineering.
It's all of it. It's physics, it's biology, it's all the good stuff, chemistry.
It's all the good stuff. Well, you get to play with a lot of the good stuff because you travel around the world, you create these videos, you do stuff for the BBC about communicating some of these key ideas of new technologies, new innovations. And how do you think that we can foster responsible conversations about new and emerging technologies? Because the immediate thing is to get very excited, isn't it? But that's not always the most ethical way to communicate that technology.
Yeah, I mean, When I was really deep in engineering, everything got so technical, and trying to explain, I mean, that pyramids example that I gave you took me a week of training, media training, to find, because my research was so technical, involving algorithms and Monte Carlo methods and turbulence models and all of that. And it just would go over people's heads. Huh. No, it wasn't intended. But it would lose people, and it would put people off because it was so unrelatable. So the key thing that I want to do through my work is to take complex topics and translate them into a language that reaches people, because we're doing all of this scientific research for people. It's not just money-making exercises. All the examples you've got here beside us, they're solutions to problems. And so I like to cover stories that affect people. I'm always asking myself, why would people want to know about this technology? And so my job, I feel like I'm a translator, because I take very technical, complex content and make it into something that engages people and informs people.
You say that these technologies are for people, but it feels like more and more we're hearing about technologies that aren't necessarily for people, AI being the key one. I hinted at it in my introduction there. Do you think AI, when it enters the realm of science communication, do you think it actually help ideas and complex concepts become more accessible, or do you think it's actually going to do the adverse?
Well, I think, first of all, it's really important to research what is happening in AI, because, my experience of AI is that it allows us to take very repetitive, predictable tasks, and we can get AI to do those repetitive, predictable tasks for us, which sounds dreamy. It allows us to be more creative, to do things that are a bit less predictable. It frees us up to become more imaginative. So a couple of weeks ago, I was all for that. But then when you listen to the news and you see what is happening and how it needs to be regulated, and there's a whole swathe of scary stuff going on with AI. And then as just an ordinary person on the street, when I'm going through my Instagram and I'm looking at things where I'm thinking, is that really real? I don't want to live in a world where I'm constantly doubting reality. And so I hope that AI, again, is used for good, because it could be so good if we just had good intentions with technology. But that's the same with everything, not just AI, but everything.
Well, I want to talk specifically about some of the audiences that you're talking to with books like Engineers Making a Difference, because it's often a younger audience who, again, are receiving the same sort of media and inputs from the external world that you are. And it's not a great advert for going into STEM if you think that the roadmap is to go and create something that's going to wipe out humanity. If that's what they're hearing, surely that's doing damage to the realm of young children wanting to get into that field.
Yeah. So whatever you just said, hear that, because that is exactly why
Okay.
I'm making the content I'm making. You know, I remember years ago, maybe even a decade or more ago, talking to large TV networks, and you know, it was all about coming up with a great science idea for television, and I've always wanted to do hopeful, positive stories about tech. And back then they were saying no one wants a do-goody story about tech. You know, they want shock and awe and horror and all of that. And it just kind of broke my heart, because there are such great stories out there. Some of them are in my book, where they're helping people. You know, the first engineer in the book has made a hand-cranked washing machine and used to work for a company that made very expensive vacuum cleaners. And he got frustrated in using his engineering skills to make better vacuum cleaners. He then packed it all in and moved to India to put his engineering skills to good use. And I don't know about you or anyone else here. Like, I just find those kinds of stories really heartwarming, because now his washing machines that use half the water of conventional washing machines and don't need to be plugged into electricity are being sent all over the world to war-torn countries. I mean, it's just uplifting. I want to hear about that kind of stuff.
The problem is, if it doesn't bleed, it doesn't read. If it doesn't make it to the front page, so all we hear, or it seems to be all we hear, is doomerism. I shared with you briefly. I mean, the reason I've been doing this for the last decade is I really want to bring back tomorrow's world. Yeah,
I'm with you.
And yet no one at the BBC will let me. We should do it together. That's the plan. That was the reason to get you here, right? Well, you luckily got to do Tomorrow's Food with Dara O'Brien, so you've dabbled in that space. But it does feel that Britain especially has, post-Brexit, a self-esteem crisis when it comes to its own vision of how it operates in the future. And at least Tomorrow's World gave some of that positivist
We
mindset.
tried to bring back Tomorrow's World, the concept, with Tomorrow's Food, and it was going to be Tomorrow's Food, Tomorrow's Home, Tomorrow's whatever, communication. And there just wasn't an appetite for tomorrow's anything. And I think that's because of the world we live in today. If anyone wants to learn about the future of whatever, we just go online and we find out ourselves. We don't need someone in a studio kind of making it all like, wow. Although I personally think that would be a great show. So I'm with you on that.
I'm in so much for this then. I mean, we're trying to do a bit of wow.
Yeah. We are.
But I think you're right. You are right, because it bleeds into the mindset of the individuals that you're interacting with every single day. And do you see that young individuals, that they have concerns about the future, or are they still hopeful?
Do you know, it's really interesting, because young people of today, which really makes me sound old, because I kind of am, but young people of today are so concerned about the climate. I don't know if it's just the people I'm hanging out with, but younger generations are not taking planes. They are, you know, working for startups and turning down jobs in the city where they could make loads of money, because they are so conditioned with what's going on with climate change. And, you know, Greta and various other role models are fueling that. And it's kind of interesting, because so much effort was put into how the climate is changing. And you can see the result. Now, this generation is very, very concerned and even scared. Because I remember, for one of the things I was doing, someone was talking about how their children are absolutely petrified, because they have that image of like a very skinny polar bear standing on a tiny piece of ice. So they've got those images in their mind. And to me, all that says is that we're not providing the right content for young people to be positive about innovation for the future. So we've got to be really clear about what the global challenges are, because it's not just climate. We've got loads of other challenges, like how do we feed an increasing population and various other things, mobility, you know, powering the world. Interestingly, there are two forms of nuclear power, and only recently have we started calling one of the two fusion power, because it's not as environmentally terrifying as the other type, which is nuclear fission, where you're splitting the atom. So it's all about education, and it's all about getting the message right and accurate, and conveying what you want to convey. And ultimately, it is down to money. Who's funding this information, and why is, I think, a question we also need to ask ourselves.
You mentioned there that this generation, they're scared almost to the point of being paralyzed. But do you also see members of the younger generation who are vivified by the challenge? Are you seeing people want to join groups who are developing solar panels or new forms of farming, or trying to solve some of these engineering challenges to overcome the climate crisis?
In all honesty, I don't see young people heading towards STEM, because I think a lot of the tools they have encourage them to become influencers, and encourage them to have a very sort of superficial persona. How are they coming across in 2D? Rather than what can they actually do with their skills. So I'm a bit concerned about that. But I hope that things get so, not desperate, but they get to a point where young people are like, right, I'm going to get I'm going to educate myself to make a difference, and they will have to, because at some point you can't avoid not having knowledge.
Well, I want to talk about that education piece specifically, because do you think we're missing some core skills in education to allow us to confront some of these challenges? Or is some of the learning happening in the same way you're describing there? Are they self-motivated to learn through other means outside of the education system?
I think learning's changed. I think a lot of people, young and old, learn differently. I mean, if your boiler breaks, you can probably find
YouTube video.
Yeah, exactly. We have to stop splitting science and art. And I don't know if this happens specifically only in the UK, but when I was at school at the age of 13, I had already made a decision to go into science, and I had to drop the arts, and I really didn't want to. And so for some reason, we're forced to make decisions about how we want to train our brains at an age where we have no clue of what solutions we've yet to engineer. And particularly from an innovation perspective, I think innovation happens in that sort of grey area of the Venn diagram, where science is on one side and art is on the other. That's where innovation is sparked. And so we are almost forcing our young to be educated out of the innovation space purely because of the way we school.
So instead of STEM, it needs to be STEAM, include the arts.
Absolutely.
Arts in there. Well, can you leave us with a little bit of hope? Is there perhaps a hopeful story?
It's been really doom and gloom.
So no, it hasn't been doom and gloom at all. But leave our audience with a little bit of perhaps a story that maybe you've seen or maybe you've captured in your book that gives you that glimmer that perhaps the kids are all right.
Well, I think the glimmer of hope that I see is that we're living in a world where if you want something done, you can actually just go and do it.
Yeah.
Gone are the days where we had to look to certain key figures and hope that they would spread the word. If you've got something to say, you can say it, and hopefully it will gain traction. And so that's something I'm setting myself, which is I would like the science and arts to be combined somehow, because I want to see progress and innovation. I'd love to see this, second industrial revolution, because we were leaders in the first. And so I'm just going to go and do it. Yeah. Like, basically, I spent years trying to be very loyal to engineering and loyal to science and loyal to physics. And I didn't want to look at art, even though I absolutely love creative things. And now I've just got to a point where I'm like, why not? And you know what? The other day I was at an exhibition where science meets fashion, and it was absolutely amazing. The new technology in materials, in manufacturing, in design. I mean, so much technology was involved in this creative process. And I'm like, that's where it is at. That is the future. So I'm hopeful, and hopefully through my work, I can spread that hope. Just take it upon myself to do that, because I'd say nobody. There are a swathe of people out there, and I want to get to know who they are and form a community. And in spaces like this, it's perfect.
Well, thankfully, those people do exist in our audience today, and I'm sure you'll be introduced to them. But if there was one single piece of advice for perhaps a young engineer watching, or someone in the audience who has children who are thinking of going to the STEM subjects, what would that one piece of advice be?
Explore. Find out what you like, what you don't like. Get talking to potential mentors as soon as you can. I never had mentors through my career. And if I had, I think I would have navigated in a much more sort of focused way. So, talk to companies, find out what companies are doing, follow your interests. Don't feel bad about your curiosities, and also learn to fail, as in check your relationship with failure. Because I think if there's one thing that really held me back, is that I never wanted to make mistakes. And as a result of trying to stay within, certain limitations, it took me longer to get to this point. So fail, and fail fast.
Oh, well, I hope this conversation has encouraged you to explore or fail. One or the other, or both, is completely fine. And I just want to thank you for joining us for the Futures podcast live. You can find out more about Dr. Shini Somara's latest podcasts and science communication projects at drshinisomara.com. Shini's latest book, Engineers Making a Difference, is available now. And I also want to take a moment to say a massive thank you to EngageWorks for hosting us today. You can find out more about the Flux Innovation Lounge at engageworks.com/flux. If you like what you've heard, you can download the Futures podcast on your favorite podcasting app, or follow us on social media at Futures Podcast. More episodes, live events, transcripts, and show notes can be found at futurespodcast.net. Please put your hands together and join me in thanking the wonderfully insightful Dr. Shini Somara.